take things forward. And this will be followed shortly thereafter by a roundtable discussion, of which he will also be steering discussions. Nitin, over to you.
Thank you, Karan. Thanks a lot for organizing this session, and thanks to the Economic Times Group for really picking up a topic which is of great relevance in the current times. As you rightly articulated, COVID has really brought in with it its own challenges, but there have been a lot of learnings, and the new normals, as we say, are emerging. And as we go through these times, as one says nowadays, there is probably is more of living with COVID as we move forward than post-COVID scenario. So as you rightly said, pharma industry having classified and deemed as essential services did continue operating in these times of lockdowns in last few months with its own challenges. But I think the industry, all the companies and the partners have come together with the focus of maintaining the drug supplies to meet the patient requirements as the foremost goal in these times. So very relevant topic to think about supply chain, which has only gained more importance in these times when we think about the future going forward for us. Today we are actually lucky to have a very esteemed panelist on this roundtable. We have Dr. Ravi Prakash Mathur, Senior Director for Head of Logistics and Supply Chain Excellence at Dr. Reddy's, Rajsekhar Reddy, VP of Global Demand Planning and Logistics from Glenmark Pharmaceuticals. We have Mr. Vijay Shetty, VP of Distribution and Logistics at Alkane Laboratories. Mr. Sanjay Manjrekar, Head of Supply Chain Management for Bayer Group of Companies in India. Mr. Ashok Bhattacharya, former MD of Takeda Pharmaceuticals. We have Mr. Gaurav Bhatia, Associate Director of Supply Chain in Cipla. Mr. Krishnakant Parakh, Senior Director Supply Chain at Sanofi. Mr. Nitin Desai, Group Chief Commercial Officer, ACG Worldwide. Mr. Sabyasachi Senapati, Head of Cold Chain with Delivery. Murli Manengore, Director Sales for RedDeck. And Mr. Nishant Vyas, Regional VP of Anaplan, as well as Mr. Arjun Verma, Senior Director, Panducorp. We'll also be joined by Mr. Pradeep Mishra, Group Global Head of Strategic Sourcing, Procurement, Commercial, Supply Chain and New Business Development at United Phosphorus Limited. As you can see, I think we have a really diverse group of speakers on the panel, both from local and global pharma companies, as well as the partners, both on the supply side with ACG and as well as on the distribution logistics side with three of the companies. So in these times, as I mentioned, I think there have been a lot of learnings. While we face several challenges, companies are really adopted out-of-box thinking to address those challenges and continue the drug supply. I will take a few minutes to lay the context through some observations we had on the industry through our work with some of the pharma companies, as well as the observation of the industry. So moving to the next slide. On the left side, you see that there have been several disruptions. As we see the challenges faced in terms of just continuing the manufacturing, although pharma was deemed essential services, some of the ancillaries were still not classified. The availability of the workforce was an issue. So there are a lot of hiccups in terms of actually starting with the manufacturing plants, leading to capacity utilization issues, and ultimately impacting the inventories. There have been logistical delays, as well as cost escalations for some of the critical raw materials, the services that the pharma companies use, as well as to maintain the workforce at the plant. There are additional costs incurred by the company. There have been cost escalations and working capital crunch in these times. Lastly, I think there has also been a disruption of the clinical trials and new product launches, as one can imagine. And with all the delays, there is one thing which probably is something that stands out, which is the uncertainty, volatility in both the demand and supply sides for the pharma industry. And that volatility is something that probably it's going to continue going forward. And in that context, if we were to really look back, then I think the resilience is one attribute which we think is going to be very essential. I will come to resilience in a bit again, but in these times, I think the pharma companies have really adopted diverse measures. I listed some of them here. Enablement of workforce safety, health has been the primary focus for the people who are coming to the work, enablement of work from home, but also very focused approach to deploy task force which can coordinate demand and supply side so that the supply can continue. There has been really great collaboration working with each other in the industry and sharing of infrastructure, sharing of information so that all of us together can operate in this kind of an environment, kind of a work approach that company adopted. And we'll talk about some of that during our conversation today. And finally, government support has also been forthcoming. There have been a lot of good examples of how the companies individually or together as an industry work with the local and the central, local, state and central governmental agencies, regulatory bodies to enable some of the work. So having said all of this, there are a few themes that we see coming up in the pharma industry. Obviously, all of us have seen the focus towards COVID and infectious disease-related therapies, and the kind of demand that is coming up and the capacity is being used to support that. But the uncertainty with respect to new launches is likely to continue at least for some time. And it will disrupt the developmental pipeline, especially when the focus moves towards COVID-related products. There is increasing focus towards securing the critical raw material, which is, I think, the mainstay for us to continue the supplies. And there are different approaches being adopted. Inventory, which has been considered probably an area of attack by many companies, at times is considered asset in today's words. And lastly, I think the two biggest themes that we see coming up in pharma is one, digitization. With the enablement of work from home, with the learning that all of us had in this time, I think there is a realization that with digital, we can operate even more efficiently going forward. So we see that going on and significantly and changing the operating model, how we really operate in the market to serve the patients. And lastly, with the focus on the healthcare, most of the governments are actually focusing on protecting the local healthcare. And from that perspective, there is a trend towards localization of manufacturing in terms of at least the ask. There are certain pockets where we are also seeing the actions. In India, come home, we are seeing some incentives being announced by the government in the latest scheme to really support the industry in terms of developing doing more of a backward integration and being self-reliant on the APIs. And with all these, I think the imperatives for supply chain are going to be going forward, be resilient, be agile in terms of meeting these requirements on a very fast, rapid pace perspective. Obviously, keep the cost at the core. The cost is going to be even more important going forward, as especially within the generic space. And finally, the operating model. How do we really look at our own capabilities and ways of working to address the needs of future? And from the resilience perspective, the last thought on the next slide that I just wanted to quickly touch upon is really it's a cycle. It's a journey, not a point-in-time solution. And we see it as a focused approach to enable resilience than a milestone to achieve and really stop at that. So with that as an introduction, I just wanted to kind of continue the thread and some of the examples that I mentioned with respect to how industry as a whole and individual companies address the challenges. Wanted to hear the perspectives of our esteemed panel on what has been the experiences, what has worked well in this period in terms of the approaches, as well as areas that probably require further strengthening. Probably we can start with you, Mr. Sanjay Mangalkar.
During this period, I think it was one of the situations where we never came across. For last 30 years, I was in the industry, but there were smooth things were going on in the planned manner. But this was unusual situation where we really had a challenge, and it was like out of box thinking, which it was a suddenly, you can say, a breakdown of a vehicle or something, and then you don't know what to do. It was that situation, and next day we had to cope up and just move across. So the first thing was coordinate with the colleagues in the industry, then communication, to work on communication. This time it was really good that communication and coordination which really helped within the industry fraternity. And I can say this is the first time I saw the pharma industry as a whole, which the bonding which was shown, it was tremendous. And people have really gone out of the way. It was not my company or your company, it's a patient. The people were just looking for the patient, and I think there where the moment was happening. And the other factor which went good was there was a flexibility within the supply chain, which had really worked. For supply chain, normally a multinational companies work in a process, SOPs, and the flexibilities are very minimum. But this time, everybody has worked on a flexibility. They just said, okay, this is a box, and within box we do anything, and just to cater to the patient. But and the other advantage was there were certain companies which had a location across the country that has really saved, because suddenly there was a movement of material across the country, but wherever the stocks were available in the locations, they were able to cater the nearest stockists of patient. So at least to that extent, the damage was little less for the companies which has many billing locations or dispatch locations to that extent. But yes, what I can say is last mile delivery was a challenge, and that is what we have to look into it. And it's like reinventing the process today, because there I think most of the company has failed. Even my company is not that I am excluded out of it, and something has to be thought about it and need to work on it. And the other one is the IT infrastructure, because in pharma industry we work on the location of CFS where the infrastructure is not so good. Some companies have provided, others the location the CFS are working on their own. So that needs to be upgraded so that even if there is a lockdown, they work from home and dispatches are just monitored accordingly to that. So that something has to be relooked, rethought about it, and work towards that direction. That's what I say.
Great. Thank you, Sanjay, and very well articulated. I think the way you said, not my company versus your company, but really working together and showing the flexibility. Thanks for sharing the learnings. Maybe we can go to you, Rajshekhar, next to share your views and learnings.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Nitin. Good afternoon, everybody. Well, yes, what Sanjay said, I concur to a great extent. I think everything worked well, especially the people. I mean, I'm sure everybody had a similar situation, a case in the neighborhood or somewhere close by or something else happening, but the people were committed, extremely committed. I think that's something which is, I mean, I'm not expected things to happen, but that people would probably take a step back, say my personal safety first. But in pharma industry, I think they put the patient first, and that has worked extremely, extremely well. And the enormous amount of flexibility which was on display for people who understood, for these organizations which understood the complexity, the enormity of the situation, they stepped up very well, right? Nobody said, well, I can't do this, it's not in my lead time, or so on and so forth. But things really, really worked well. Everybody put the patient first. But a couple of things, I think, what we have to learn as a supply chain in pharma industry in specific, there are a lot of cobwebs which we need to clean up, which has come out, right? For example, you go talk to a supplier, some of the suppliers did not build any risk mitigation plans. They kept on churning out. But when the crisis hit, it hit them hard. And there are some of the suppliers who are telling us, come back and see us after 12 months. Well, patient is not going to wait. The disease is not going to wait, right? So those are the kind of things what we need to work as a supply chain. Yes, we need to make maximum profits for the investor, for the stakeholders. But at the same time, if some of these kind of situations happen, how are we going to react? It's a VUCA world. Even in spite of COVID-19, things are changing. It's very uncertain. It's volatile outside. But we are not. There's a classic story, the oak tree versus a reed, right? So we have to be the reeds, the world. Right. We cannot be the oak trees. That is one. And the second thing is, well, I think that cooperation, Sanjay had mentioned, I would like to take on a little bit more. Well, we talked about it. People showed a lot of willingness, intent, but when rubber hit the road, nothing was on visit, nothing was on display. Okay, which is something which I wanted to bring it up, reach out to the teams. Yes, we all talk about it, nice to talk about things, but then when I wanted to share a plane, when I was going to US, well, nobody wanted to pick up the remaining space, right? Or somebody had a plane which is going empty, they did not tell me, well, I've got the plane which is going, do you want to join in, right? We created WhatsApp groups, exchanged information, but well, things did not move. I think that's the one area where we have some work to do, some distance to cover as far as the trust is concerned, as far as joining hands and going ahead. There are areas which we have to be extremely protective, the R&D, the knowledge, etc. But then logistics, I don't think is one of those areas. Here is what we could benefit together. Here is where social distancing is not important. Here is where we need to work like hand in glove and for the benefit of the patient in the end, right? Those are the points what I wanted to just pick up and put in front of the group.
Great, thanks a lot. Very important point about trust. And as we say, that especially when we work on this, the partners on both sides, that trust is the common thread that kind of brings the network together. So thanks Raj for very insightful experience sharing. Maybe we can go to Mr. Ashok Bhattacharya, hearing your perspectives. You have been operating from the boardroom. So from your perspective, what has been the experience and how do you see some of the opportunities for us to work on going forward?
So a couple of things. I think it has already been well covered, and also Nitin, the foundation that you laid at the beginning of it, coupled with Karan's. I think a couple of observations were that, first of all, as executive leader managing an organization, I think the importance of the supply chain is not only the distribution of the product. I mean, many people understand supply chain as a distribution of the product and nothing else. But basically what we have seen is and supply chain was not really that valued. I have attended a couple of sessions where I've been speaking. I said that there is a great importance. We can discover a drug in the laboratory, but everything depends on the supply chain really to bring it to the last level to the patient. And that's the chain that we need to look at. So what's that chain? And that is what we saw, the sudden pandemic, but the only thing which was advantageous to us, because I can talk more about multinational companies, is that because of it being a global pandemic in nature, every organization started thinking outside the box. They never kept themselves confined within the box of the SOPs, which are very, very stringent. But then the major factor was keeping the patient at the center of whatever activity the organization does. They were more flexible, but within the framework of the organization in terms of compliance, in terms of adhering to regulatory compliance needs, and things like that. So basically what I saw also, that initially there has been a big disruption which has impacted the industry. For example, PharmaRack, which is an agency which gives the data, it talks about that from the pharmacies, the retailers, around 25 to 30% of these stocks got rebound. They did not get the stocks from the distributor in the month of April and later to some extent in the month of May. If you look at the distributor side, the fulfillment was unable to be there for the retail demands. Went down is because of non-availability of the staff, the problems with regard to transportation, of receiving the goods from the organizations. The third thing, if you look at from the manufacturer side, there was a total dip of around 25% in the month of April compared to the month of February. The dip of 25% of sales in that.
Yeah.
What really triggered, I think it was unfortunate that a pandemic has led to trigger the thoughts of how do we really bring in an efficient supply chain. I think that's an unfortunate part, but people have been thinking about, because of the resource crunch or because of the economic status, every organization is looking at how to manage their finances and show a better P&L and really give what the stakeholders want or meet the expectation of the stakeholders. What I saw was the resilience, the passion within the supply chain to get integrated, and the whole organization, whether it is the IT, whether it is the finance, whether it is the whole supply chain, whether the sales and marketing, everybody got into together. So I think it led to a great team building, what I saw. And that led to overcome the challenges which we faced earlier in the month of March and April. And slowly, if you look at that, where the manufacturing and all were under capacity of 40%, 50%, has now gone also around 75 to 80% in the month of June. And that's only because of the combined effort and a team building effort of everyone. And the most important role which the supply chain played was in terms of procurement of raw materials, procurement of packing materials, quickly looking at alternative source, maintaining the quality of it. Of course, one of the things which went on was a steep rise in the supply chain costs, particularly because of labor cost and of transportation cost, which really had a financial implication on every organization, was mostly on a steep rise of the transportation cost, which is there. So these are a couple of observations, but the positive thing is that in organizations, people have become and walking the talk of patient centricity.
Great. Thanks a lot, Mr. Bhattacharya, for great thoughts and experience sharing, as well as some of the impact areas. Just taking the thread forward, I'd like to bring in Sabyasachi, with respect to your side of the story, with respect to really how in these kind of scenarios or situations, the logistics as a obviously industry has been facing challenges with all the lockdowns and all, but how you have worked through it and really what have been the experience.
Thanks, Nitin. Thanks. Hi, everyone. This is Sabyasachi from Delivery. I was hearing the views of other panelists, and everyone would agree this is an unprecedented situation, and needed a lot of resilience and adaptability to ensure that we can still keep operating and grow the network over a period of time. So I think when the lockdown hit, for the first 3, 4, 5 days, essentially our network shut down, right? So we work across a bunch of sectors. We started as an e-commerce logistics company, and post that we diversified beyond e-commerce into a lot of sectors. Pharma is one of them, but then also electronics, consumer durables, chemicals, fashion, apparel, and so on. So for the first 4, 5 days, I think our network sort of completely shut down. So we're not operating any vehicles, any kind of deliveries. There was a lot of pending deliveries, which sort of pending shipments, which sort of were present in our warehouses and our hubs as well. But I think the way our network is designed and the way we have developed our in-house kind of tech stack, it helped sort of help in recovering to that extent a bit faster, right? So post the first 4, 5 days. Once we had clear directions on delivery of essentials, so we started doing that, right? So we opened up a few thousand pin codes, and then gradually we ramped up the network over a period of time, and now we are operating at almost 100% capacity, right? Where we are present across around 18,000 odd pin codes across the country, right? So I think the challenge in this time was, there was a lot of backlog of orders and shipments that are sort of piled on, which needed to be delivered. The key challenge was, how do you ensure workforce management? We employ, more than 30,000 people across our network, and we have to ensure that if they have to get back to work, right, and a lot of them work on the field, as in delivering orders or transporting, managing hubs, our dispatch centers and so on, how do you ensure safety, health for them, right? And at the same time, obviously ensuring a certain kind of security for them. So I think, the challenge is how do you sort of, get all of that going, especially once, the network is shut down, to restart, takes that much bit more effort, right? But I think it was a little bit around, as I talked about, building resilience in the network, which we had started doing over a period of time. And that helped us to, recover to that extent faster. So, for example, let's say, the situation on the ground was very dynamic. So today, one area was declared as a containment zone, and therefore your operations, your hubs, or your nodes within that area were shut down, right? Now, our technology is such design that we were immediately able to reroute the shipments to another hub, right, which was outside the zone, and still ensure that the chain of transportation, right, the chain of transit is not broken, right? So I think that kind of resilience, both in terms of infrastructure as well as in terms of technology, which can help, for instance, in this case, route shipments, I think that was essential, or that was quite critical for us to come back to almost full operations, right? I think the other thing we saw is, we are largely a B2B company. We work across a lot of sectors, including pharma. But during this time, we saw a lot of, interest from pharma companies with whom probably we haven't worked so much in the past, who wanted a, a transportation distribution kind of solution. And probably the existing, service providers or vendors were not able to cope up, right? Now, delivery to that extent, being an organized pan-India large player, we were able to mobilize, as I said, a lot of our workforce resources, our trucking partners quite quickly, and therefore we were able to provide that solution. So, we were, in fact, as a result of this, we onboarded multiple new pharma and healthcare companies with whom we probably hadn't worked earlier, right? And so I think that was a good experience in terms of working with them. I think the other thing was, we, as I said, we are a B2B company, but this, as a result of this crisis, a lot of end consumers reached out to us, consumers, hospitals, doctors, doctor associations who wanted, medicines to be delivered, who wanted masks, sanitizers, PPEs to be delivered. And, they were at a loss because they would typically rely on some, agent or franchisee or some service provider to do it. But all of these guys had shut their establishments, right? And therefore, they sort of reached out directly to us. And as a result, for such individual, consumers or associations, we ended up, transporting thousands of shipments around essentials, right? Around medicines, masks, and so on, right? So I think that was also quite a sort of significant learning for us in terms of, managing expectations. I agree, there were a lot of delays in the network. I think some of those delays we're still facing because, there are still, there is a still, initially, I think in beginning May, when things started easing out, there's a lot of backlog which needed to be cleared. But even now, there would be on-ground restrictions in terms of, zonal zones, in terms of checks, in terms of, some kind of district or state border restrictions. Therefore, there are delays in the network. I think the idea is, while it takes more time, but the idea is to get it delivered within a certain defined period of time and provide, as much serviceability across the country as possible, right? So I think, these were at least some of our learnings. I think one last thing, what we also saw is while a lot of the transportation happens, pan-India, cross regions, intercity, I think as a result of the lockdown, the nature of the demand we saw started shifting to a lot of hyper-local, right? Where there's a lot of, movement that was happening within city, right? Whether it is for essentials and later for non-essentials. People didn't want to obviously step out. In many cases, they're not allowed to step out and visit shops and so on. Shops are closed. Now, how are you fulfilling, sort of hyper-local or intercity kind of requirements, right? And that posed a new challenge in terms of distribution, model, right? Distribution of fleet delivery model. Because for us, it's also very new capability of vertical you just developed, right? As opposed to providing, line haul or kind of, end-to-end kind of logistics solutions.
Great. Thanks a lot, Sabyasachi. And completely different ballgame, right? In terms of mobilizing 30,000 people workforce across the country. So great learnings and insights. Thanks for that. Continuing the thread, I would like to bring in you, Arjun, talk about your experiences and how you're kind of seen things developing, just building on what earlier speakers say.
Sure. Good afternoon to all. I think among all stalwarts of supply chain, great to hear what has been going within the company. I think from a technology standpoint, I think I resonate my thoughts with Sabyasachi. I think we've been able to really see what is happening on both essential and non-essential side of the story, being a technology player. And that gives an advantage to share the best practices of both sides and amalgamate and give the best practice to an industry which needs it the most. During COVID, I think over and above the typical essential goods, pharma played a great role, because that was a time I could not have said that demand is disrupted, but it disrupted in a way that people started piling up medicines more than what was required. So that kind of created such a disruption that today the key medicines which were routed in a standard way, the SKUs which had to be routed become very typical of that particular nature, because that was in demand, as is rightly said by Ashok sir as well, keeping cash flows alive and making a mark in front of the board. But over and above, what we really saw as a need was collaboration was a word which was known pretty much in intra-company definition, right? Today, what is from a technology standpoint, we are seeing an inter-company collaboration mode, where we are, Pando being a so-called a technology player, we are also giving advantage of network pooling at a dynamic level. So today companies, so for example, Dr. Reddy is here, I'm sure, Coca-Cola being a very different industry actually had to lend those 1,500 trucks to Dr. Reddy for making sure that the deliveries were made on time. And that's a classic example of interdependability or inter-collaboration between companies, which has come true because of that. What we also saw is that breaking silos, right? I mean, today in the industry, if you look at different SBUs which are working, they're all working towards a common vision and mission of the organization. But if you look at it from a 30,000 feet, what you're really looking at, that they're still working in silos. And I think that is where technologies played a role to kind of bridge those silos, and all of them, and typically, as we call it from a technology, that we are trying to bridge the gap between planning and execution. Right. So there are a lot of companies whom we dealt with. People say that we've got great plans to manage the resilience and business continuity. But are you able to execute what your plans are is I think the gap where technology kind of bridges that. Right. That is where I think we've played a great role. In fact, Johnson & Johnson and all these companies actually have dealt and onboarded with Pando. During the COVID times, and that's a feather in our cap, because during COVID time, if you're able to onboard companies, that means we are managing their expectations worth the value and perception both at the same time, right? I think another important aspect people talk about transporters is critical, is about maintaining a healthy cash flow for transporters, because for these people they work on liquidity and daily level liquidity, right? So ability to automate the way you pay to your transporters, ability of a transporter to raise an invoice in our technology is something which has also come out as a critical aspect to touch upon, and technology has been enabling, and Pando is doing a good job there. I'm sure all technology players are doing that job. And something which I thought is pertinent is also about identifying new suppliers, right? As rightly said by one of the senior members, was that, the APIs are 80% sourced from the China today. Right? So what are the alternative places where we can source the same? That's another aspect which we have kind of touched upon. Identifying suppliers is also a matter of, they should also have a backup plan. I mean, they should not be a short-term alternative plan. And that's where Pando has helped a lot of companies to do so. And last and foremost was basically the interpretation of MHA guidelines. I mean, what we really observed when we were shooting our standard algorithms of optimization of routes, every state had its own interpretation of MHA guidelines, right? And that resulted into a major disruption, because 60 lakh trucks on the first day got stalled on the road. And they had no means to, enter one state to the other, because interpretation was so different of all the rules and regulations. So that was the time the optimization for us dynamically played a great role. We could actually provide companies with alternatives to take different routes. As Sabyasachi, in fact, rightly pointed out, containment zones are kind of changing every day, just like a red light and green light on a road. And we could actually help companies to kind of discover newer routes, optimize for their inventories. And this is both primary and secondary, because within primary, its internal movement also had to be optimized, right? Until the time it does not move from the plant to the warehouse, what do you really source to the end customer? and the secondary bit of it as well, because ultimately those typical retailers, those distributors had to receive all the respective medicines. That's pretty much from a technology standpoint.
Thanks a lot, Arjun, for sharing how technology has really enabled the breaking of the silos and operating in this kind of scenarios and situation. Just carrying the same thread forward, technology is obviously one of the biggest enablers in supply chain. And I wanted to bring you in, Murli, with respect to really talking about how you are seeing, especially technology and cold chain as two aspects which are critical from pharma supply chain perspective, sharing your experience and learnings.
Sure, thank you. I think one of the most important things that technology played was to bringing visibility with respect to the supply chain and the transportation services. So some of the things that Freight Tech, what we were able to, can you hear me?
Yeah, your voice is breaking in between.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Sorry about that glitch. Yeah, so as I was trying to point out, one of the things that technology companies could provide, especially at Freight Tech, has been to provide that level of visibility when it came to determining the availability of transportation services in itself. Working with different industries, we were able to organize even a circular logistics system, to enable some of the pharma companies to make use of transportation services to especially ship essential drugs, number one. Number two, what we could see was this was not just the issue of availability of the vehicles or drivers per se, but as I think as Arjun was also mentioning, able to play and provide that level of information with respect to routing or addressing various legs of the supply chain itself, right from primary to secondary to even the last mile. It required that extensive connect with the transporter network and to see who is available at this point in time and to coordinate that level of availability with various pharma companies and even the other essential companies that were essentially moving the permitted goods. The other thing that what we could see from a technology standpoint has been on, for the first time, we could see an increased collaboration, wherein I think some of the speakers already pointed out the intention to reach out and help each other, which it was much more visible in this case. But at the same time, it did expose with respect to unpreparedness. For example, by not having the level of data or to predict the patterns, nobody knows really how long the situation will continue. In the absence of that data and its analytics, that led to each day being handled in a particular way. But I think this is all leading us to a level of preparedness to manage situations like this. And it is ultimately we are going to get into a situation of much more readiness to face adversities like this and be more adaptable to technology to find a solution to manage some of these aspects. And this is also highlighted, from an organization standpoint, how critical supply chain function is, not just by moving goods from a point to point B, but really ensuring its timely delivery in the case of crisis and so on and so forth. So from my perspective, the way we look at it, this is set a trend now. Organizations are going to increasingly adopt technology to ensure much more visibility and control of operations when they move their goods. And the second aspect is that transporters, some of the transporters especially who are not like tech-enabled like delivery and others, realize that smaller to medium-sized customers, transporters realize that they cannot be left behind also. Now they are in a situation, how companies like us can enable them to bridge the imbalance in the technology and thereby to improve the connectivity as well. So I say that a larger mainstream getting connected as an essential way of moving forward.
Great, thanks a lot, Murli, for very insightful thoughts. The level of unpreparedness and how companies really, or how different partners together worked on it. So I kind of would like to bring you, Mr. Parab. I think you have been at the forefront working with the industry, with the partners, with the government in driving some of this collaboration. So could you please share your experience during these times?
Okay, thank you, Nitin. First of all, your some senior member of the team mentioned about this collaboration as one of the thing which we should work upon, and we worked upon and demonstrated it in the last 3 to 4 months that we are having. And also I must mention that Ashokji and etc. others have mentioned that supply chain plays an important role in every businesses, and being in pharma, being essential, we have a greater responsibility to reach the medicines to the patient and be patient centric. And I believe that we have done that in last 4 months, wherein you see that products are available to the patients. But coming to the point of collaboration, I personally believe that every adversity offers opportunity and learning. One of the biggest learning during COVID crisis has been that we all have to coexist and collaborate and not only compete. That is the principle that I sense. We all have similar needs and challenges, whether it is in the form of API availability, global transportation, customer clearances, warehousing, trade bodies handling, primary and secondary movements, etc. So, in such situation, if we collaborate, we can see a lot of synergies which can bring about best practices and make the whole ecosystem conducive, and can also bring in efficiencies. Even though we work with different organizations, my belief is that we can work in a united way as one voice, walk the extra mile in your operations, and this can be demonstrated by our actions. So collaborative attitude is to strengthen our supply chain. That can be one of the point. Share best practices could be another thing. We by now during this global pandemic know where our supply chain cracks could be, and we must build upon those capabilities and fill in the gap that we encounter. So in this situation that has gone back, we have really worked on collaboration in a big way. When it came to dealing with agencies, whether they came with our industry operations, and that has really helped. So collaboration, according to me, plays a very important role, and that is what we must work upon as moving forward.
Great. Thanks a lot for highlighting that and sharing the experiences. We'll come to you, Mr. Vijay Shetty, to get your thoughts. Can we unmute?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Sorry, I was on mute. I forgot to. Yeah, nobody could actually predict this situation. I think everyone in our life we faced it for the first time, and I think this is very good for every supply chain professional. I think we went through this particular and still going through it, learning through it. A lot of it is talking about collaboration, alignment, teamwork, and all that. I think it really played. People in this pandemic were really scared, whether it is manufacturing, whether it is at a C&Fs, whether our stockists, whether even retailers. I think the entire chain, people, I think the human resource played a very key role. At the start, I think when it actually got struck, though government gave a lot of instruction, but there was a lot of panic situation all across. Nobody was clear in the ground. The police were not even allowing essential trucks to move around. I think one of our panelists mentioned about trucks stranded. So I think slowly, within a week's time, I think we all collaborated together and tried to see how we can. Procurement looked at, what can be done with regards to availability of APIs, so that the manufacturing team can produce. The manufacturing team also looked at how do we motivate our manpower to actually come into office. So HR announced incentive schemes to see that, if you are whoever comes to the office will have some incentives. We organized buses to make sure that, because transportation was not available. And today also it is not available. So transportation was provided. So what I'm trying to say, every situation had a solution. Okay, every problem had a solution. So that was organized, because of which we could ensure that like 50-60% of the capacity of the plant was running, and we were able to serve. Okay, on the demand side, there was a lot of panic buying done from the consumers end, our patients, saying that okay, this medicines would not be available. It was a situation of panic, and we can understand that. And suddenly we see a lot of demand, and that demand had to be like first manufactured, then transported through primary from the plant to the warehouse, from warehouse to the depots, and from depots to the stockists. Now, in the entire chain, when you actually look at, when you break it out into a small bucket, you see that yeah, there were problems. And today, if I have to look at it, like if I touch one by one, from a manufacturing perspective, of course, the capacity for manufacturing has moved. API availability has improved a lot. And apart from it, I would say with regards to transportations have also, I would say availability is there. Of course, still, when we look at our stockist level, I think we went to an extent of even supporting our stockists, because stockists also did not have manpower. Distributors did not have manpower or even trucks for them to actually play, because the drivers and the cleaners actually had also moved out. Okay, you must have seen a lot of migrant laborers going back, and now there is huge scarcity which is talked about. So we had to re-engineer the model with regards to distribution itself, saying that okay, we will work with players who have own fleets. When it comes to the last mile deliveries, we'll look at dedicated models, trying to see, instead of daily dispatches, how we can work out with a dedicated vehicle and try to see that okay, how we can serve the customer, serve our distributors. When we looked at the distributors, we also saw that they were also lacking, because I think Bhattacharya ji mentioned about prescription being bounced, okay, because material not being available at the chemist level, and the product was not available. So we also heard this from many of the chemists and also from the field force. So we all collaborated with most of the stockists, most of the key stockists, to deliver the products maybe like incur that cost as well, and at the stockist level to make them available information saying that which are the transporters who can help you carry your stuff all across, and that collaboration actually works. Similarly, at this chemist level also, we collaborated with the All India Association of Pharmaceuticals and Druggist Association, AICD, to actually make sure that there is also an app developed for our chemists to see that okay, if a particular brand for alchem is not available, where they can type that particular product and see where it is available. So I would say a lot of new things have been done, and I think it has opened up a lot of new things in terms of like how do we actually do business. Okay, what I can see, because of this collaboration alignment across all levels, I think within April we could solve that problem. And I think when we went into May, slowly these situations have started becoming better. Of course, the cost part, yes, we still face, as cost of APIs have gone up, few of the APIs have gone up. India had put some restrictions on export of some of the APIs, which they have now removed. Plus, they have now also like there has been good availability of transportation as well, like because most of the industries are still not working 100% because of it is available. But like there could be challenge once everything unlock 2, unlock 3 happens, then what? Okay, the resource crunch is there. The migrant laborers are still there's a big question mark. We don't know when, if they return, not return, how are we going to? And cases in India is also in the rise. So yeah, still the situation is dynamic, and we need to still work on it.
Great. Thanks a lot for sharing very great examples of how you work with your partners. And that actually brings me probably to Mr. Desai. You as a partner, as a supplier to the pharma industry, your perspective would be greatly valuable.
Thank you, Nitin, and good afternoon, friends. As you know, ACG supplies 70% of capsules and packaging film to pharma industry. So it was a challenge for our team to ensure that our pipeline to pharma industry continues. Most of our factories located in Maharashtra. So we had an early 15 March lockdown. So we were able to get all the permission in 72 hours. And on the fourth day, all our factories were running. And in 7 days, we were at 100% capacity. The second challenge was how to bring all workers to the factory because they're all afraid and there's a COVID positive. So we hired all the hotels, guest houses around our factory, and we put all of them in this guest house and hotel, and we give a special incentive to them to ensure that they stay and come and work this thing. So production is taken care. The next is distributions. We supply capsules from Kanyakumari all the way up to Kashmir, and we have got 200 dedicated trucks working for us. No driver was prepared to go to all these places because of all the challenges. So we had a meeting with drivers and transporters, and we explained them that you are not supplying capsules. You are supplying capsule to pharma who are making drugs, which goes to the nations, it goes to patients. So you are all doing a service to the nations and patients. And we gave them a food for 5 days, mask, sanitizer, and then 200 trucks started flying after 10 days to various parts of India. We're going to put tracking system, so where we can track each and every truck, where they are and where they stuck up on which border. And we had a mobile to all drivers. This is how we took care in next 10 days distribution, and I think we were able to supply capsules and packaging film to most of the pharma company across the India. So after production, this thing is taken care. The third part was the raw material, because we keep inventory of 45 days. Now the raw material is not available. Our primary raw material is gelatin, which is made from bones. There is no bone available. Slaughterhouse is closed, and it's difficult to get gelatin. We wrote later to the 11 state governments to allow the movement of bones inside India and allow slaughterhouse to open up. It is still slowly opening up, but this definitely help us, all the state government, central government, allowing us to ensure that all bones are manufactured, slaughterhouse starts, and the gelatin continues. They are all running at 40-50% capacity. So we are covering by imports from all over the world to ensure that we have got a sufficient stocks to ensure continuous supply to the capsules. So this was on a procurement side. And as you all are aware, the boxes is the biggest challenge. The paper mills are not working. So now we have developed a dashboard for all our raw materials, the tier 1 supplier, tier 2 supplier, tier 3 suppliers. And we are tracking the stocks of each and every sub-suppliers to ensure that we get all our supplies in time. Now this was all in April. Now our challenge is that we have got 11 factories in India, and we don't want that any of these factory has got a COVID positive, because if we shut down one of the factory, it will cut down the production of capsules and packaging films. So we are working now social distancing. We have put CC cameras, video, because human being cannot be chained, cannot see the social distancing by eyes. We tried that, keeping marshals and auditors and penalty is not working. So now we are going completely digital, install cameras and video across all our factories. And if anything is not happening properly in a social distancing, cameras throws the warning, and in toilet, in the change room, in the canteen. The social distancing is the biggest challenge we have got today, because if one of our factory get affected, it will affect the entire pharma industry. So this is the all steps we have taken. And we have seen in the organization, there's a tremendous empowerment, synergy across all the department. And we all feel very proud that we are not making capsules or packaging film, but we are ultimately supplying through pharma company to patients.
Right.
The challenge what we are facing still today is the JNPT port and the airport. There's a huge challenge at JNPT port initial 1 month, because there's a huge backlog of import. You can't get imported raw materials located. Air shipment is also challenged today. So this is what we are struggling, and government need to improve upon that. And with all these steps, will ensure the continuity of supplies. Thank you.
Right. Great. Thanks, Mr. Desai. I think great insights of how you are using digital to enable the social distancing. So that actually a very interesting thought, and I would like to come to just using the technology as a topic. The kind of several examples were shared. We request Nishant you to kind of share your perspectives. We have seen it in India, globally, the use of technology in supply chain. So your perspectives. And,
sure,
and just
thank
one quick time check. We actually are about one hour into the discussion. So just wanted to highlight.
I'll make it quick. Thank you, Nitin. And first of all, I would like to thank all the panelists, especially those who are from pharma industry, because directly or indirectly you are helping not only India but globally. The news we are making, positive news we are making as a pharma industry. So thanks a lot for standing in these difficult times. I will like to keep my thoughts on two topics. One is that what we have seen in the customer and what we are doing for the customer, especially in supply chain. So some of you may be aware that Anaplan is a planning and scenario modeling platform where you can look at different use cases in supply chain, sales, finance, marketing, in pharma, also in clinical trials or cross to net. So it becomes very important during these times when suddenly business changes, demand collapses in some industry, demand rises in some industry. So what we did first was reached out to all of our customers and offered them help to build a changed business model so that they can deal with this uncertainty and see that what is the right business model in this kind of scenario. So it was an iterative process, but as a company we decided that rather than selling, we will be more empathizing with the community and trying to see what we can do as a service provider on this. Extending this theme further, what we also did, we provided our platform free of cost as an initiative called Anaplan Helps to non-profit, government, NHS, in India also to government of Haryana, where one of the big four provided a planning model for them on the beds and ventilator, the way COVID is progressing, and what kind of equipment should be there, and also for South Africa, also for UNICEF, NHS, and other organization. And we organized a hackathon where we called most talented people in our community to build rapid apps which can be deployed. And these apps are around back to office apps, something around inventory planning, so that customers can, or pharmaceutical companies who are engaged in this life-saving battle, they are not waiting for implementing something. They can just go to the platform, fill up the simple form on Anaplan website, get access to the platform, and start doing the business modeling for the critical things which are needed to fight the COVID battle. So that's what we tried to offer as a small bit, not as big as you guys are doing, but a small bit from the technology side, what we can do for the larger ecosystem. Second thing, what I've seen is supply chain has become very critical during these times. Any customer I talk to, and what is happening, earlier it was very deep, now it has become very wide. So it has remained deep, but it has become very, very wide as well. So everyone want to contribute and collaborate with supply chain now. CFO want to see, how profitable I'm doing, what actions we are doing in supply chain. And we used to call it SNOP process, which some companies were using, some companies were not using. But because of this pandemic, now all of these departments are coming together. And I will say it is even going beyond company, and it is including your distributor, supplier, as well as your client. And people are seeing that extending supply chain horizontally, how much more value it is bringing to the organization. And of course, later on, if I get the chance, I will touch on the AI and ML subject, which is very popular in supply chain, and how we are partnering with Amazon in that area, Amazon Forecast, to help companies in this. So given a limited time, this is my first views.
Great. Thanks a lot, Nishant, and really great initiative to really support the kind of Anaplan help was really great initiative to learn. Thanks for that. Very quickly, we'll move to kind of our next speaker. Gaurav, would you like to kind of share your experiences during this time, and specifically areas that we should really focus on from a strengthening perspective?
Sure. Thanks, Nitin, and thanks to ETH for kind of bringing us all together on this great panel to share our thoughts. So firstly, I think my co-panelists have already covered a lot of points to a great extent. Just to add, without being repetitive, one is, this is kind of a relatively an event which we never predicted, or you can call it as a black swan event. Nobody had predicted that we will be in such a scenario, in such a situation. So if I go back to what I recollect from a subject called supply chain risk management. So it tells very quickly, taking a minute to touch upon that, it dwells upon mainly two bifurcations. One is your known risks. So when I say known risk, it is like your forecast accuracy is a known risk. It will by all means the word itself says it's a forecast. It will never be 100%. So you have a risk. It can be your MAP could be 20% error, or it could be a 30% error, but you have a risk there always. Either you would be out of stock, or either you would be having a higher inventory, or redundancy of your stocks. The other side is any event which is unprecedented in terms of your supply chain risk. So how do you prepare for that? For the known risk, you have ways and means. You have targets for quarters, for years. But for the unknown, what you kind of can be prepared with is in terms of health of your supply chain. When I mean, what I mean by health of your supply chain is basically your lead indicators, like your stock to norms is one key lead indicator. If you are good at that, probably like we were very clearly on our, especially our class A and class B SQs, we clearly had covers for at least minimum 3-4 months, and hence we did not feel much pain from any kind of unprecedented risk. But yes, very surely our lag indicators, which is like our OTIFs or our C versus A, will definitely be impacted with all the factors which the co-panelists mentioned, like manpower not being there, resources not being there. But to kind of summarize very quickly, I think we were in a good shape because of our strong procurement strategy and our strong distribution network which we have, and still leveraging on that. A lot of opportunities in terms of demand that we got, specifically on our respiratory side. We got a recent approval from the US FDA, which is a positive for us, and also we tied up with a lot of companies making available specific COVID-related medicine like tocilizumab, which is Actemra. So it's prescribed for almost severe COVID patients. So we are kind of utilizing our distribution network to ensure that it reaches to the right echelon, to the right node, and availability is there. So and again, technology and digitization helps a lot. That is definitely a plus. Second, a lot of collaboration that we did in terms of our backend, which is in terms of procurement, because somewhere we all know this event slightly exposed one weakness, I would say, that we are not so strongly backward integrated. We are all dependent a lot on China. We are all dependent a lot on other countries, and this being a global pandemic kind of made us collaborate so much with even our partners or our suppliers, taking support from the government. Like we arranged a charter from India because the flights were stopped from China, so we took support from government to arrange a charter here from India, sent it to Shanghai, got our API specifically for ARVs for our manufacturing, and ensuring that the end patient or the end consumer doesn't suffer. So yeah, in short, collaboration, backward integration, and technology, these are key elements that we, all the organizations or all the pharma organizations, are definitely looking into, and as I mentioned, the health parameters of the supply chain, which is more the lead indicators. Yeah.
Thanks, Gaurav, for bringing in the very interesting perspective on tracking the lead indicators and plan for the unknown in a way, and also really managing through the backward integration and technology. We'll come to you, Dr. Mathur. I think one of the thought leaders in this area. Just wanted to hear your perspectives about the experiences in this period.
Yeah, thanks, Nitin. So I think a lot of interesting and important points have been covered by the speakers of this forum. But I'll try to see what value I can add after this hour-long discussion. What I like to just focus here on, before we come to collaboration and tracking and visibility and the other important points that we have discussed so far is first, we have to try to understand actually what happened. And what has happened is that what happened was that lockdown was, announced. What did that lockdown lead to is that lockdown took a lot of capacity immediately out of the equation. Okay, I mean, we're talking of supply chain, so the most critical thing over there is capacity. So whether it is manufacturing capacity, transportation capacity, or capacity of your warehousing, it was totally out. So that is the disruption. And the insight that we draw from that is that the warehouses were still there, the airports were still there, the ports were still there, but what was missing? What was missing were the people, right? So what is critical in this entire equation, according to my observation, is the important piece in this equation is people. And organizations that were able to quickly resolve those issues, whether it is by collaboration or doing things like one of our speakers mentioned, by work like Vijay mentioned about how to go back to the factory, whether what actions you took, by arranging special buses, special permissions, or the other sort of interventions that were there. People who figured out that what is important is to get people back to work are people who were able to get back on track faster.
Right.
And the related thing, of course, is people, of course, also understood that if you cannot get people physically onto the workspace, how do you get them back virtually, right? Of course, we have all been working on virtual meetings, so on and so forth. But more than attending virtual meetings, what people did was move processes back on onto the digital platforms, right? Things that were happening more in the real space, in the physical space, they were being challenged. Can you move project management onto the virtual space? Can you move controls onto the virtual space? So, for example, if you have documentary control, so for somebody is having to see a physical document to approve it, to review it, to sign it. So, has digitization digitization helping you to work virtually? So, virtual work is not just attending meetings on a virtual platform. Processes, controls, everything that you could move at the back end and do it at somewhere else. So, the dependence on the physical space that had to be resolved. One, get people back, drivers back, people back into the warehouses, open up the disruptions on the route. So it is all about people. I think that is the most important piece that I like to highlight. Everything else, of course, has been covered on collaboration and this thing. So that is for now, I like to say that, when we figured that out, we were back in business. At the time people were not there, we were struggling.
Right, and very, very well put, Dr. Mathur. I think that's the central kind of people are the central to everything we do, and I think that's a very important dimension you brought in, how very quickly or effectively you could move to the virtual space and using the people as capability to address the challenges. So thanks a lot to all the speakers for sharing great learnings, and actually just continuing the thought that Dr. Mathur put in place. I think the question is, how do we really look at these different elements of supply chains and think about really simplification, right? As the technology enables us, rather than focusing on electronification of the existing processes, how do we drive simplification? So on the simplification theme, we'd like to come to you, Mr. Bhattacharya, to kind of hear your perspective when you look at the supply chains. And today's pharma supply chain is still very complex, while there has been some improvement. So as a customer of supply chain that you have been, could you just outline how should we look at the supply chain and drive simplification, and what would the expectations from customers like you when you think about the simplification of supply chain?
Yeah, thanks, Nitin. First and foremost is, it's very late that we have realized that supply chain is of utmost importance, or a very important vertical in the running of any commercial or success of any commercial organization, whether it's the healthcare industry, whether it's the FMCG, whatever it is. Why is it essential? As I mentioned before also, that normally people within the organization feel that supply chain is more of just a distribution, team. That's the reason you will look at, if you look at most of the multinational companies, supply chain vertical is so important that their solid line reporting is to the global headquarters and not local. It's a dotted line relationship. My supply chain guys had a dotted line relationship with the local managing director, but the solid line relationships were all with global. Why so? The reasons are two. One is that with respect to local manufacturing and supplying the goods, meeting the requirements for the domestic market and also for the export market. The second thing is that what you import in terms of finished formulation. Most of the oncology drugs, for example, you get it in terms of finished formulation. If you look at the pandemic time also, and where we saw that there was a panic buying, the panic buying from the customer side was mostly on the chronic therapy segments like diabetes, hypertension, oncology, respiratory. Those were the segments. And therefore, if you look at the AVAC report or the IQVIA reports, these are some of the segments which have not really declined. There never has been a new prescriptions, but continual buying has been there. Whereas some of the common products like a bit of antibiotics and analgesics, antipyretics, the pull has been more from the retailer, with the thought that because of this pandemic, people will come on their own and buy an anti-cold tablet or an antipyretic, and that has been there. Now, I think, Nitin, you would appreciate from a consulting point of view, where most of you talk about is the BCP, business continuity plan. Yeah. And I think this supply chain has never been a part of the BCP in the past. I remember when it came to me, there was so much of pressure and people were not really ready to accept, and they used to laugh away, what will happen when the natural calamity like a flood or something comes? But I think this is not, I think the whole organization should have a BCP in terms of the supply chain. What are some of the other pertinent things? Because it's not the end of one. There might be many other pandemics or many other emergency situations with some of the other border tensions going on now. I think the bigger challenge will be on the API because we are 70% dependent on China, and there will be tremendous amount of pressure. So one side is the COVID pressure, the other side is the border pressure, new regulations that everything has to be in India, you stop imports, things like that. All these embargoes might come. I think the major thing is that in order to ensure that there is no disruption of services to the patients, I think we need to, the supply chain in coordination with the QC, the QA, everyone, the finance, need to look at developing alternative vendors. I think vendor development becomes an integral part and an important aspect of the supply chain. Vendor development and meeting to regulatory requirements in terms of quality standards, in terms of the API, in terms of packing materials, in terms of raw materials, in terms of even transportation. Because if you look at, we need to look at the future, because if the vaccines and all comes, I mean, today, it's not that today we don't have vaccines, but the newer vaccines which will be coming, or any of the other oral things, cold chain transportation will be extremely important. So we need to look at that. How do we manage, identify, and develop the cold chain much more efficiently? How do we develop in terms of export, our relationship with the cargo complexes, like the beautiful cargo complex which has come out at the Mumbai International Airport? So we need to look at that. The second thing is also from the supply chain, we need to, have a better partnership development in terms of making people understand, whether it's in the shop floor in the factory, whether it is the transporter guy who is shifting the goods, that whatever you are doing, it is for the life of people. It's that, every single activity of ours is saving a life somewhere or the other. That emotional training has to be there, because currently we are more into a domain training, domain knowledge and all. Those are fine. But I think the emotional training has to be there. With what India has learned, particularly, we had a very high IQ, we had a good EQ. We didn't have a health quotient. I think what this pandemic has taught us is the health quotient. And I think that all of us, the entire supply chain, because they handle the products in such a way, whether it's an injectable item in the factory or whether it's a dissolving solution or whatever it is, I think maintenance of hygienic is going to be of utmost importance in the whole process. Even the transporter, we need to look at that. It cannot be done in the same way, because it's not that COVID is going to go away tomorrow. All the other viruses, the Ebolas of the world and all have all been there, and even it is alive today. So we need to live, but how do we live with it? And supply chain plays an important role in terms of educating people. The other thing is supply chain is of utmost importance on the revenue sheet of an organization, because right from the planning stage, the procurement, the inventory, the godowns, you look at the production planning, everything that is there. There's a huge amount of working capital of an organization which is with the supply chain. And I think effective management of that working capital has to be there in order to ensure that we optimize it and really bring in the P&L look brighter for the organization. I think these are some of my thoughts. And the other thing which I was just wondering, thinking when people were talking about, is that the supply chain goal should be efficient in order to deliver the product at low cost, and also should be responsive in order to respond quickly to any changing customer need. I think that's going to be the mix of the supply chain thing. So there has to be a lot of flexibility in the whole stuff.
Absolutely.
Those
very
are
well put.
my
Great, Mr. Bhattacharya. Thank you.
Some of my thoughts.
Putting that out. Very well put. I think as the need for, in a way, lean and agile, both coming together, considering this volatility that is going to remain in the system, it's going to be important how we still keep the cost low, right? As you say, and that brings me, Raj, to you. When we, especially in pharma, which is a supply chain for most of the pharma companies, are global in nature, either both on the inbound as well as outbound side. So in simplifying supply chain, how do you use the logistics service providers or other partners that we work with? Where do we really, the collaboration that we talked about, how do we take it forward and leverage each other's capabilities and partnerships to drive the simplification? Any thoughts from your side?
So that's for me.
Nitin, I think, are you asking me, Nitin?
I'm asking Raj. Yeah.
Okay, right. So I think that's an interesting point, what Ashok had said. And even Gaurav had said that actually a little bit contradictory in nature, right? We're talking about flexibility, and Gaurav was very comfortable saying that we had 3 to 4 months of inventory, we are good, right? But then are we not building elephants which are too big to solve? Yes, 3 to 4 months, but then there are certain therapeutic areas which are not going to sell for the next 3-4 months because patients are not visiting doctors, doctors are not opening the clinics and whatever, right? So what would happen in that kind of a thing? So it's a constant question of what is the right balance? Is it 3 to 4 months inventory? Is it 90 days inventory? Is it 60 days inventory? What, right? Yes, those are the challenges what we have. And I think the key point what we all need to work in supply chain risk management is building flexibility and responsiveness across the supply chain. The volatility, uncertainty is going to stay, is here to stay. It's not going to go away, right? What we have seen in pharma industry about a decade and a half back, with all the promotions, consumer promotions coming in and all, this pandemic has done. And nobody knows where it's going to go. So we all have to focus on building that flexibility, not saying that, okay, I have enough stock, it's fine, right? That's going to be very important. But the point what you asked me specifically about logistics service providers and everything, I mean, I think they're in a way like frontline warriors, because those guys have to be at the airports, seaports. As Nitin Desai was mentioning earlier, JNPT is still not fully operational. There are challenges. The truck drivers are not going there. You can do whatever you can do to the guys who are in touch with you. You can give them assurance, you can comfort them, you can give them promises, you can support them. But these are the guys who are in the front line sitting far away, right? And how do you support them? How do you give confidence that things are going to be fine? That's going to be a constant challenge. There's fear in the minds of those people, and it's not going to be easy. So here is where we have to work very closely with the logistics service providers. And those guys know a trick or two to help us to manage space, because today what is missing in international logistics space is previously there used to be a lot of passenger freight. There's a lot of ample space available in the market, but now there's no space, right? If you see certain sectors, the capacity is dropped by nearly 50% because there are no passengers flying, so all the flights are grounded. What do we do? This is where logistics service providers dependence goes up, where they understand the dynamics of the airline industry. Just for as an example, the airline industry, the aircraft, when they're sitting on the ground, they're actually losing money. It's not an asset which you don't use, you don't pay anything, right? Those guys have to pay to the lease, those guys have to pay the parking charges, those guys have to pay to the crew and all, right? So logistics service providers have to go 1 or 2 steps ahead and sit with the airline guys and try and help them understand, look guys, this is an opportunity for you, where you can use your assets which are not used today, and you make some money, right? Previously, a charter which used to be about $300,000, $400,000 to go to you, cost is negligible, right? Fuel cost has come down so drastically. They could actually work with much less cost and all. So this is where you have to work together. And at the same time, logistics service providers are also in a difficult, tight spot because people are not working. There's no money in the market. The airlines are asking them for money ahead of time. This is where the collaboration with the pharma companies come. If we work together, go take up this challenge as one group, then we could have it, right? For example, if Gaurav had to hire a charter one way to get the material flying in from China to here, I mean, somebody has to take the charter back, right? So I could have taken it, Ravi could have taken it probably. This is where I would say collaboration has to come, which is where collaboration has worked in some areas, but this is one area it did not work. And logistics service providers can help there. But if we need to work together with them, give them the confidence, tell them that we are here to support you, you support us, I think that goes a long way in building the trust, which is the point I come back to in the end, right? Everybody's, because the cost has gone up, there's no space, the cost has gone up, everybody's trying to save money, but at the end, well, if I go book a charter, I'm paying full money, somebody else books a charter, he's paying full money, industry is losing, nobody's benefiting. So which is where we as an industry have to understand, come together, trust ourselves in the logistics in the industry, and then we can go out. Like one of the examples what somebody had mentioned earlier regarding Coca-Cola and DRL sharing the capacities, right? Well, that's process industry, which is good. But at the same time, what would happen is, not in all circumstances, the equipment is exchangeable, right? Something which works for a Coke may not be work for a DRL or a Glenmark or something like that, right? Within pharma industry, there are more synergies. We all understand change controls. The provider also understands what is needed.
Yeah.
Because he has to maintain the temperature controls and all this stuff, which is where we have some way to go to work together and make things happen. Yeah, that's where I would leave it at, and I would extend my arm and say, if anybody is willing to do it, I'm happy, more than happy to connect and more than happy to work together.
Yeah, great. Thanks. As you mentioned earlier, it's not probably the biggest differentiator to compete in the market. So can we draw the synergies? I think telecom industry is a great example how they do synergies and lower the overall cost of operations for everyone, right? So I think, and we have our complex supply chains. Almost all companies have anywhere between 15 to 25 CNF agents, for example, in different states. So where do we draw the synergies? How we can simplify and standardize the processes could be an option. And that's why probably I will bring you in, Sabyasachi, really your experience across sectors and the point that Raj just mentioned with respect to the partners taking also the next step in terms of identifying how we can work together to drive the overall cost low while meeting the patient requirements in the market. So your thoughts with respect to how any learnings that pharma can really leverage from other industries or any other thoughts that you have?
Yeah, I think yeah, definitely. So the last, I think, couple of years, we've been working across a bunch of sectors, especially areas like FMCG, consumer durables, automotive, and so on, right? To simplify and create supply chains, as what earlier speakers talk about, how do we create supply chains which are more flexible, more responsive, and more resilient as well, right? So I think I can look at two concepts which we have tried implementing other sectors, right? And both of these concepts are applicable potentially for pharma, right? One is this concept that we have of what we call as E2B, like end-to-end supply chain solution. Right. I'll elaborate more on that. And second, what we call as a D2R, which is essentially a direct to retail kind of solution, right? So E2 is essentially, delivery is essentially a full stack service provider, right? Over a period of time, we have built capabilities to provide logistic services both for your inbound, outbound, and then within outbound, looking at your mid mile, last mile, first mile kind of services, as well as providing warehousing services, right? Both for your running mother warehouses, running smaller dispatch centers, and then on top of that, going beyond domestic and looking at cross-border services where you look at import and export to other countries, right? Now, being a full stack service provider, right? I think one is you have operational capabilities and infrastructure to do that. Second is, we have built the whole tech stack has been built in-house to essentially enable these different legs of the supply chain. Right. And being a full stack, therefore, service provider with our own in-house tech stack means, you have the ability to seamlessly pass data from one part to another, right? Which ensures essentially that you have better visibility of inventory across the supply chain. You can better track movement of shipments. You can better track individual orders, till they are not delivered, to the end customer, right? And that has given us the ability to implement this whole, end-to-end or E2E, as we call it, across a bunch of industries, right? And the way it works is, one example essentially way it works is, we, take up, for instance, the operation of, warehouses, right? So especially, see, if I look at a post-GST era, right? In a pre-GST era, there was a need to maintain a lot of redundancies in warehouses and depots across the country, right? Each state potentially have a depot, a CNF, or a warehouse. So you'll have mother warehouses, multiple mother warehouses, then you have 20 plus regional warehouses and so on, right? In a post-GST era, I think there is a way where you can simplify some of the structure by cutting down on some of these regional warehouses and essentially reducing the number of nodes that you have in your network, right? Especially in your upstream network. And there we have worked with clients to essentially redesign their whole supply chain network in terms of how many warehouses, what size they should have, where should they be placed, right? Where should your next level of depots or regional warehouses be? What should be the size, scale, and scope of operations? And we have gone a step further where, being a full stack provider, we have actually, taken on operations of the warehouse, right? So, running the warehouses, managing the inbound and outbound movement, integrating the flow of material into our overall inventory management and transportation management solution. And as a result of this, what we've seen is, because of providing this end-to-end solution, what we're seeing is certain benefits, that come about, right? One is, you have reduced inventory, right? Sometimes you maintain certain redundant inventory in different regions because, one is, you're unsure of how, soon you can shift inventories between regions because the supply chain is, either your turnaround times are very high or they're not very responsive, right? So I think one is reduce inventory. Second is, I think because of this whole, information integration across different legs, you have a better visibility across the distribution chain. So I know, for instance, at a central level, how much of inventory of different SKUs lies across different warehouses, across depots and CNFs, right? Which helps me then better balance some of this inventory, right? So, if I have, shortage of certain inventory or certain products in one area, I can pull it, from another region or another depot and so on, right? And I think that could be possible only because, you had, we could come up with a core set of services for transportation warehousing and back it up with a full technology stack services, which provides, inventory management, analytics, last mile services, and so on, right? So I think that's one idea, which potentially has implication beyond, like FMCG, consumer durables, where we have done this, right? Looking at pharma spread. I think the second is, where we have again, where you've done, one of these implementations is the whole concept of D2R, direct to retail, right? And that obviously, has more application for something like, not just FMCG, but also for, retail, right? And retail of various forms, whether it's fashion or electronics, but I also see a relevance for pharma, right? Where essentially, you have a distribution chain over a period of time, right? That has multiple layers, in terms of, having CNFs, distributors, stockists. You have then pharmacies, both smaller pharmacies as well as pharmacy chains and so on, right? Now, way we have worked across industries, essentially, how do you ensure the product moves, for instance, directly from a CNF or a depot directly to a retailer, right? And which helps essentially in, cutting down the time for, ensuring the inventory being available at the end retailer. And also, ensuring better availability or better fill rate at the last mile, right? Ensuring that there's, lesser time. So for instance, if there is, earlier there were 2 or 3 days where there was a stock out because it takes time for someone to place an order, process the order, move it from depot to a stockist or a distributor, then to a retailer, right? That time essentially is saved because, you have knowledge of the inventory of the depot, how much of inventory is lying where, and you're directly managing the order management kind of system and the flow to retailers, right? So you're reducing stockouts, improving availability, and essentially faster time to availability at the end product. So I think in a post GST era, we have been working on multiple solutions. These are 2 solutions where I've seen application or seen benefits for other sectors. And pharma could be potentially one where, with some kind of obviously tweaks and changes, this could be implemented.
Great thoughts, and thanks for those inputs and sharing some of the learnings, Sabyasachi. Just building on the same thought, I think just post GST era, as you rightly said, I think it enables India to be seen as one market if we talk domestically. But I think in the pharma context, I'll come to you, Mr. Parab, to really understand. I think you talked about collaboration as the mainstay of how we dealt with the last 2-3 months of challenging times. But if we were to really take some of the thoughts that Raj and Sabyasachi mentioned and take those learnings from our last 2-3 months period together, how would you translate those into really rethinking, reimagining the supply chain of future for pharma? Mr. Parab?
Thank you, Nitin, for this. Everything what we do, okay, is has to be patient centric. That's a fundamental that we talked about. Business environment is changing. Okay, the new models are emerging. As Sabaseti says, that typically pharma had 25 to 30 CNF agent, that is getting on down to 12 to 15. So that is a lot of biologicals also coming in. That Ashok Bhattacharya mentioned that we are moving over to. So the cold chain management is very essential. So on this background, okay, what we can right now maybe recognize is that we have to have good amount of sharing, okay, and coming together, collaboration. Okay, so one area which Sanjay also mentioned is that we are very weak in last leg distribution. So this is one area which we have to collaborate with our trade partners and improve upon, or these business solution providers. So this is one thing which we have to really take it up quickly. We talked about distribution centers. Okay, so today we have a lot of issues with transportation per se. While there have been improvements, we keep on tracing the truck where it is. So if we have and it doesn't cost much to have a GPS implanted on each of the truck. So there could be a tower, okay, for tracing the vehicle. So when I press a button, we should be able to get this thing known. That is one area, transportation towers which can be created. So that is one thing which we should really can make operations easy. We talked about Atmanirbharta, but there are still 70% of our sourcing happens from China. So this needs to be changed, and I understand that companies like DRL, Arvindo are targeting the bulk drug manufacturing. But what is relevant is the key starting material, okay, KSM, that Nitin you mentioned. So this is one area which has to be learned quicker by the industry, so that we are self-reliant, self-dependent, and that is perhaps the need of the hour. Okay, so that is one area which we have to work upon. The cold chain management is very critical because all of us are looking out for biological, and there is a great amount of missing or gaps at the moment when the goods reach to the patient. So I do not know, there could be use of technology to make the product thermostable, using technology as a variant, and make the product more safer, as also the develop some of the packaging component which can hold of the temperature for a longer duration. So these are the areas which I feel, okay, and also the manpower in supply chain. As we know that many people in supply chain come by virtue and not by has been traditionally. There should be a process wherein we really upskill the supply chain current fraternity and develop the institute. More and more NITI type organizations are emerging, so that we are able to deliver the manpower that is a need of to support the need of the supply chain tomorrow. These are my quick thoughts on this direction.
Great, thanks, Mr. Parab. Very well put across the different dimensions of collaboration with partners, Atmanirbharta, cold chain technology, and then bringing in the people side. And that brings me to you, Mr. Mathur. You talked about people being the central to whatever we do and enabling this newer way of working. So when we think about supply chain resilience, and resilience is going to be a key attribute for supply chains going forward. Can you just help us demystify what is resilience? What does it really mean? And how can one achieve it? And share some perspectives.
Okay, thanks, Nitin. Thanks for that question. So let's first understand what it means to be resilient. Whether it is in normal English or supply chain parlance. So typically, when we talk about supply chain resilience, it is what we are actually referring to is your ability to bounce back. When you are facing a disruption, whether it is from the demand side or whether it is from the supply side, if you have that competency in your supply chain, you can say that you're resilient. Now, resilience is not a thought, state of mind. You say, okay, I choose to be resilient. Then, from tomorrow I become resilient. you need to design for resilience. Resilience need to be a part of how you have created your network, how you have designed your network. So obviously what that means is you need to have a very good understanding of the risks that are associated with your supply network. Okay. And like somebody had mentioned in the talk earlier, there are known risks and there are unknown risks. So obviously to start with, let us understand what are the risks associated with each and every part or each and every node of the supply chain, and then mitigate for it. Now, one obvious way of mitigating supply chain risk is to pile up inventory, right? The other way to mitigate supply chain risk is to have alternate suppliers or alternate partners. So basically what it means is if you have a plan B for your identified risk, you can assume that you are resilient to a very large extent. But of course, this comes as a cost. And in pharma, it is not very easy to develop alternate partners because it's a very controlled industry, and then you have to go through a lot of change control and documentation before you can have a backup for a material or a backup partner, so to say. So understanding your risks, and then having so what comes along with resilience is your agility, because if you have multiple options, then it gives you the option to maneuver within that network. So if there is a disruption in one point, you are able to move through an alternate route. So that is one. Now second part is how do you deal with unknown unknowns, right? So the way to an unknown, by definition, you do not know really do not know what is there that is going to hit you. So there has to be a program in organizations wherein you try to get market intelligence, have a system wherein you get assessment of things which are not directly in your line of sight as of now, but you are able to predict them. You are able to understand, what is coming towards you, and then the ability to generate scenarios. If you are able to see, when you're dealing with something which is unknown, even with a normal forecasting process, there is an error associated with it. Now, when you're trying to deal with something which is unknown, there is even a much higher level of error that will come. Okay, so the ability to assess the probability of a scenario unfolding, or the ability to assess probability of multiple scenarios unfolding, right? And to assess a cost to it, or to assign a penalty to it, and then to be able to take informed decisions. You have if you say these are three probable scenarios, then do I have a plan for three probable scenarios, and what is the cost for creating those three probable scenarios? All this assessment and evaluation has to be done. If you do it and you get it right to a certain percentage, then you are in business. So then you're resilient, and not only being resilient, you're also agile at the same time.
Great.
Those were some thoughts I had around your question. Thanks for
Thank you very much. I've been instructed to wear the mask, so let me know if you are not able to hear me in between. So great thoughts, and I think we talked about one element about the entire dimension, the people, and the thinking about the processes to understand the risk and planning ahead of time. And obviously technology will play a significant role in doing that. So Nishant, I'll come to you to understand how you have seen technology being used to enable resilience, agility, and as a solution provider. Any perspectives from your side?
Sure. Thank you, Nitin. And I think Dr. Mathur covered some part of it. I always like to listen to him, because he's a big fan of scenario modeling and planning. So I'll not go on those points. But from our perspective, I have a couple of broad statements. One is that we are seeing the future supply chain will not look too much on the past. So earlier, customers were obsessed with forecast accuracy and working on a black box kind of a modeling where system will tell them what is the forecast for the future. But due to this pandemic, I think everyone is clear that agility is the need of the hour. And maybe what I see more as a usage that will come on the autonomous supply chain. So whatever can be done by the machines, people will let them do by using AI and machine learning. And the smart people like you will be more responsible for scenario modeling and collaborating with the different divisions to actually work on the things which human mind can only work. So I have few points. I have divided them into short term, medium term, and long term, so that companies can respond with this crisis. So first is, as of now, today, what companies will do more is to look at, how we can preserve cash, how we can look at the changing demand and take decisions which are important, to do today. And also, it will be they will be like a hawkeye watching the working capital and liquidity requirement. So just like we have that concept of supply chain control tower, the cash control tower is coming in a lot of discussion that I am seeing. So the CFO and supply chain alignment will go a long way, and that's how any technology platform has to operate, so that these two people can collaborate and work together. So that I see, just out of the crisis, so that your head is out of the water. Then what I see is, when we go medium term and we start slowly recovering from the crisis, the forecasting models will shift to, include external indicator, causal factors, predictive intelligence, will be more AI and ML focused. Second thing, what I see is that there will be a lot of cross-functional teams and decision making that will be happening, so that to make the process more agile. And the pricing discipline, because of the different teams that are involved, that comes in the center. And not only supply chain team, but there will be involvement of sales, marketing, CFO, and that has to be a robust and collaborative supply chain which will come into the picture. Now, going forward, when we are out of the crisis and everything is hunky-dory, I think companies still need to look back at this pandemic as an opportunity to create something more resilient in nature. So they will institutionalize the crisis and resilience planning. So just like we build a worst case scenario in the future, so they will have these kind of scenario models to deal with this kind of unprecedented change. Because apart from pandemic, there are a lot of geopolitical changes happening. So everyone will be, like to configure these changes in a scenario models. And there will be a lot of focus on how quickly they can accelerate their digital initiatives. So this pandemic, you would have read in different researches and white paper and webinar that are coming, that it has pushed cloud and digital transformation in a long way. So people realize that people are going to work from home. They need to operate from mobile, from devices. So if my software is not capable of working on that, or my technology platform is not capable of working on that, it is a big, competitive disadvantage that I'm going to. So digital transformation will become 10x or 100x depending on industry to industry, and people will like to adopt more and more integrated planning, I will say. So earlier the planning was finance, supply chain, sales. Now it will more become an integrated planning. So how, as an organization, I can respond to any crisis, bigger or smaller, as a joint, collaborative effort, not depending on any single division. And I think all of your companies are taking, all the panelists who are there, their companies are taking these steps. So I see that in India, we are very, very flexible. We work out innovative solutions to manage the crisis. I think we all will come out better after this crisis. That's what I'll say.
Great. Very well, very well said, Nishant. I think all the elements that you talked about, bringing them together as part of the integrated planning kind of a approach to kind of considering the impact and the inputs from various cross functions across partners also, and how technology can be leveraged for that. I think that's a great insight. And I think as we are kind of talking technology, kind of bringing in more of digital into our thinking, enabling this, I would like to bring you in Gaurav to really share your perspective on where do you see the biggest need for digitization in supply chain. In general, pharma has been behind other industries in digitizing. So how do you see where could be the first focus for digitization in supply chain? Gaurav?
Thanks, Nitin. So I think digitization and collaboration is the supply chain key, or the future for supply chain. No second thought, no doubt on that. And as Nishant already covered, I think in terms of supply chain, we need more tool which is end-to-end connected, or kind of helps us to build end-to-end seamless data flow. Earlier, we had a different demand planning tool, a different a backend tool, which is like APO or PPDS. For PPDS, there's a different tool. So more of end-to-end tool, which we right now also call as integrated business planning tool. So a lot of organizations, including us, have adopted that, and we are on the journey to connect all our kind of functions together. So I would also like to highlight, or what I still believe, demand planning as core will always be at the center. Will be it your demand planning, be it your supply planning, be it your distribution requirement planning, which takes like DRP kind of a tool. So all these have to be connected end to end, and when you, and it all starts from the right demand planning or the right forecasting. If that is the first element where the supply chain starts with, if that goes wrong, then you might see problems. Or if that is correct, I would rather say in a more optimistic manner, if your demand and forecasting is correct or more accurate, then you have the right serviceability available. You have the right products at the right echelon, at the right nodes available, and also your cash flow can be preserved by avoiding slow moving, non-moving inventories, which a lot of organizations are kind of struggling with, I would say, or trying to manage better. So right focus or right demand planning will never lose its relevance or its importance for sure. And then connecting it with the right supply planning, how do you ensure more of campaigns? So tools gives us that this is your runner product very clearly. These are your repeaters. So you should plan more campaigns. Your efficiency, your productivity, your improves. Your changeover reduces. So all this would be connected seamlessly by a IBP tool end to end, and I think that is very important. I would not by saying this, since your question said which is the most important, I'm mentioning this, but at the same time I don't think the other tools will kind of lose its importance or lose its steam. There are tools like in procurement, Ariba gives you a lot of value. Even in distribution, DRP tools are there, which gives the right knowledge where your inventory should lie, or how much inventory or how much stock should lie at which node, which echelon. So I think this will not lose its kind of importance. But since you asked where does it live, where is the maximum ROI, hence I was trying to mention, adding to it very quickly in constraint of time. I think predictive analytics and machine learning are two things which are kind of getting a lot of importance, and also giving a lot of ROI to it, because again, your demand planning tool might not have, some of them have built in, but some of them does not build in the machine learning. So basis the curve, the crest and troughs, or the change of nature, especially like Mr. Ashok also mentioned, we do not face kind of so much problem in our chronic. The patient continues there, but in acute, in hospital supplies, you face ups and downs. Hence, there you need more predictability, which a predictive analytics tool will help you. Machine learning helps you both on the forecasting or the demand side, as well as on the supply security side. So yeah, I would say that holds the maximum value or the maximum ROI would be.
Great. Thanks, Gaurav. I think very well put. We do say in the current times, cash is the king. I think you are definitely highlighting information and connectedness, creating that visibility is also very important to enable efficient operations. And could be the place to start with from the digitization perspective to enable that. So we'll bring you in, Mr. Desai. I think you have been at the forefront in digitizing, and you shared some of the examples earlier and on how rapidly you adopted some of those tools in the current times also to enable smooth operation. So it would be really great to hear your perspectives on how that has helped you collaborate better with the pharma company as a partner.
Thank you, Nitin. So during this lockdown, we developed 2 new digital initiatives and we already had a 1. So first I will cover what we have developed new. The day the lockdown was allowed, we had almost more than 100 machines ready for FAT for customers in India and abroad. And some of the pharma companies want these machines immediately. Now nobody can visit our factories. So immediately in the first few weeks, we develop a new software and a new video where we can give FAT of the machines to the client remotely, and he can sit from his own factory and see the entire FAT and clear the product. And then we record and video the whole thing and again send it to him. So he can run through with his own QC department and other departments. And finally, they clear the FAT. This is run successfully in last 3 months for more than 40 customers in India and 30 customers abroad. The second product what we developed, we call it a digital installation and commissioning. Because today people cannot travel to red zone, containment zone and many places. And there are many big pharma companies, they need some machines urgently for capsule filling, blister packing, for mainly COVID drugs. So we again develop a new digital tool whereby by AR and then AI, AR, we use all these facilities and entire installation commissioning we can do remotely sitting in our own factory. And other side factory, the engineers on the machines. And we have installed 30 machines in last 3 months in India like that. So this is the 2 new digital products we developed in last 3 months. Our most important digital product which we developed before the pre-COVID, that's IoT. It's a new product we launch on IoT where we install our own machines IoT and we also install on other vendor machines. And before pre-COVID, we are working with some pharma companies. So this IoT has helped this pharma company tremendously during this lockdown. They were able to remotely control all their machines, what is happening on their machines, what is a breakdown, what is a preventive maintenance, what is the documentations. And they all have realized that this IoT, what they've done pre-COVID, has really helped them to monitor their factory better way, better documentations. And in social distancing, you don't want a lot of people to go to the machine to check what's happening on machines. So this IoT allows you to start, stop, monitor, check the efficiency, check the energy, provide training, everything remotely without going near the machines. And now we have seen the recent trend, because pharma company is historically behind compared to other industry in digital transformations. But now we see there is a tremendous interest from most of the pharma companies to go to IoT, and just got a payback is also very fast because we also see it will have your efficiency, energy consumption, training, US FDA record keeping. So we feel that payback will be for you will be less than 1 year. So this is how we are trying to help the pharma company in digital transformations. Thank you.
Great. In a way, you actually reimagined the future already by using digital, and really, I think great to hear the story about online FAT and the remote support from commissioning perspective. So thanks for those insights, Mr. Desai. So I think with these two kind of great insights, Murli, I will come to you to take your inputs on when we think about digital in supply chain. I think Gaurav highlighted where the highest ROI would be to start with, and Mr. Desai shared some other examples. Could you share how to think about where to and how to digitize? I think that's one question that probably is on top of many supply chain professionals. Where exactly do I start and how do I chart that journey? Murli?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, so we've been working with different customers across industries. So one thing that has emerged in common is when you look at the objectives that need to be achieved out of digitalization, it could be a combination of improved visibility, faster time to market, accuracy, cost optimization, and even making supply chain your competitive advantage to you, right? So when we started discussing with various customers, we realized that most of this has been seen from an inward perspective. What I mean is that customers have been looking at their processes, their systems, and assessing the level of maturity before they can embark upon digitization. But where we brought in an element was we need to look at the supply chain partners in itself, because any digitization that we take need to hold hands with the supply chain partners as well, who, if you look at from a perspective, could be your transporters, your warehouses, your CFAs, and so on and so forth, who may not be necessarily enabled at the same levels with respect to a maturity on a process or a technology. So any solution or anything that you're attempting upon digitization need to carefully weigh how to manage this imbalance so that your digital initiatives are well met with, number one. Number two is also from a perspective that it has to be seen from both as an outcome and a ROI driven. When I say an outcome driven, I've seen companies looking at two different drastic ways of handling it. One, you make the rules and then you manage the risk or reduce the risk. In other cases, companies have broken the rule and taken large amount of risk also. So there is a, like we're trying to see cases where most are trying to manage in between that, in the sense that you do break the rules where it makes sense. What it means is it is an opportunity to weed out inefficiencies that exist in your current way of system or process. That's number one. Number two is at the same time you're doing it in a calculated risk model, because you ultimately at the end of the day need to have a clear idea as to where the ROI is going to come. From that perspective, if you look, the opportunities could be all across, right from Gaurav was mentioning like an integrated business planning program, right? Wherein the need to associate with various other functions. But along with that, if you look at from a larger procure to pay itself, as an enablement process as a part of digitization, there are a lot of avenues wherein outside of your own system inefficiencies exist. Classic case could be even a transportation procurement itself. While companies are using tools like Ariba or any such tools to procure at a reasonable cost, it requires more than the cost, the other aspects of the transporters with respect to their ability to dynamically change to your requirements, manage situations like this, be on the fly able to change the routes and so on and so forth. So not only they need to be enabled efficiently on tracking transportation aspects and so on and so forth, it also requires, the fast changes, faster adaptability, not just an organization that may have, extra fleet and so on and so forth. So that becomes one of the other aspects. Ultimately, the parameters that we arrive at is what is the cost to serve? If you have a cost to serve today, by product to a customer, by lane or the consignee and so on and so forth, what is it that you're trying to say? Because as I mentioned, supply chain, if it has to be of competitive advantage, it has to be seen from an overall cost perspective also, how it helps improve the sales of the product and how it makes it much more available in the market and so on and so forth. So that is one aspect when it comes to like looking at it, trying to really unlock the potential. Sometimes some things are not very obvious. A good process engineering helps in identifying those areas which are typically overlooked for quick wins. So from our perspective, it is all about putting a holistic picture out and then map it to the overall business objectives that each of this organization would like to achieve. From that is where we try to evaluate, where to digitize. Coming to the point of how to digitize, this is very important. I think at the central to this piece is getting the fundamentals straight itself. The first and foremost, I would say, is that it should be forward-looking, right? We have seen cases where there is a tendency to accommodate existing legacy structures because the change management is seen to be too tough. Right? There would be resistance to move. There are cases where we have come across, transparency is not a desired requirement. Or visibility is good, but we don't want that much of visibility, right? So there are various cases of each organization has their own intricate models wherein they want to achieve part of it. But from our perspective, when we try to work this out, we try to take into view that is much more forward-looking, number one. Central to that is the data strategy. For example, any digital thing, when we look about, data becomes a very important factor. Once you're connected on the platform, the amount of data that gets generated is a wealth of information. Much before even we can take it to an AI or even ML model, even the daily transaction data can highlight. For example, in the case of one of the cases where we're helping was the customer didn't have visibility into the last mile, right? So they were trying to arrive at pattern. A simple logic program, a model, help it arrive at patterns based on the driver behavior patterns, or it could be what time of the day these things are happening, wherein there's a much more delay. So a repetitive pattern emerges based on the data that gets generated on the platform, and a strategy around organized data and its configuration really helps pave way for AI and ML subsequently. So I think a data strategy becomes a very important aspect of it. The third is, third point, if I may add, is largely around the solutions need to be, we need to keep in mind its scalability, the security aspect of it, because once you're connected, data is the key thing. Ability of these data to be kept secure inside your network, outside, especially when most of us are providing solutions through cloud-based systems. The data security becomes a paramount thing, and that has to be really factored when you look at how to digitize from that perspective. So the combination of all this is what customers to arrive at where and how to digitize.
Thanks a lot, Murli, for those insights. Just being cognizant of the time, wanted to quickly move to the next one and keep it getting to the broader point now, looking at what we're seeing from the different governments, considering the risks that are seen from the healthcare perspective and wanting to secure the healthcare for the citizens. There have been a lot of news articles all of us have seen with respect to governments announcing localization of manufacturing kind of drives. So in that context, Sanjay, I would like to kind of hear your perspectives on when that kind of a dimension comes. India itself has herself had announced policies around local manufacturing. Some of the speakers talked about it earlier. So how should different stakeholders really enact on that particular element so that we build a self-reliance from the drug supply chain perspective? So Sanjay, your thoughts, what could be the roles of government, individual companies themselves, as well as the industry associations as a group together?
Well, this is a very good thought. I think earlier, if you look at it in the midst of 90s, India was self-sufficient. We were manufacturing the raw APIs locally. But the pharma industry has always been working on the cost-centric part of it. Cost is a factor where they look at it. And suddenly, in between, the trend had come where the cost became a major factor, and wherever the raw materials or APIs, whichever country were able to provide us at a reasonable cost or at a lower cost, we moved there. We closed down our own setup. Okay, yes, there was a government, tapism was also the part of it, and we tried to move out. Now the government has given us this. Yes, I know, last 3-4 years, this government is trying to get back the manufacturing of API back. They tried to come out with a draft pharma policy also, where they wanted manufacturing to happen in India. But what has happened is, in the initial part, they did not come up with any of their benefits which is there. But lately, with this situation, government said, yes, I am ready to give you support. Please come back to India, start the manufacturing part. But when you look at it, government is giving certain benefits, but the benefits are not yet spelled out very clearly. Second part is the pharma companies. Yes, the pharma companies, the bigger companies can get together and help their suppliers or manufacturer to upgrade their current facilities and build up the facility for the API part so that can be self-sufficient. That will help both the manufacturers, the made in India concept part of it, and also the larger companies to get the API at a reasonable cost. But looking at it, there is a financial impact which is there. And this financial impact, when a company, when the pharma companies come together, they can only shell out to a certain extent, not beyond that. But what we look at is the government has to come out with a very clear policy or very clear outcome to the manufacturer. One is they had to give a land free of cost for initial period of certain years. Second part is they had to give finance at a reasonable cost, the financial part of it. Electricity, water, these are the areas which they have to provide at a reasonable cost. Because everything is built up on the cost factor. If the cost of this is not reasonable, the survival of this made in India concept will not work. And pharma companies are really working on a thin margin part of it. So this hand in hand with the government and the pharma company with keeping centricity of the patients, and looking at it made in India concept. All these things has to go together. We cannot have say we said made in India, but we will not allow you to get any financial benefit to work it on the whatever cost. So that will not work out. And second
Right.
part is it's not so easy to get to do the make in India very fast, because pharma, you know that any API, this manufacturer, when it goes to the product, it has to go into stability part of it.
Yeah.
That is a process which is, and that will take at least 3 to 4 years to have the change from imported part to the local manufacturer. That's what I get.
Great. And absolutely right. It has its own timeline with respect to when that can be enabled. And that actually brings me to a very interesting point with respect to, as you articulated, I think government has to do its own job and companies can come together to create infrastructure. So I think that brings in, it's kind of considering the long gestation that is required to kind of secure these benefits and make it reality. Mr. Parab, I will come to you to seek inputs on how do we continue collaboration with the government through this kind of journey and ultimately ensure faster and reliable supply of the drugs to the market and to the patients.
Okay, so very important, Sanjay just covered, two aspects. One is this, the gestation period government is supporting. What is important, is our industry is a control industry. Okay, so we have price control in terms of, control drug, and also for the decontrolled drug, we cannot increase the price more than a particular percentage. So that becomes a, important bottleneck as of now. So there is a, clear, if you really want to gain out of this transition, there are two things. China today, has been able to lower the cost because of because of the scale. Okay, whether it is bulk drug or key starting material. So scale has to be inbuilt in India. So India has to be seen in two ways. One is, moving forward as the source by the other companies, and also there has to be collaboration within the organizations to share the capacities, to use the output. So that is one angle. The government also has to come forward and clearly define what are the benefits, okay, in terms of subsidies, incentives, as well as the price approval that can be granted. So this is one thing which has to really happen on a fast track. Merely saying that we should produce ourselves will not work. Okay, so fortunately current government is in support of these type of initiatives. They have good intent, okay, and they are to be now taken up into the next scale by the industry associations, by the pharma companies per se, and there are positive movement. Okay, so I know for the cases where in some of the companies are working on this direction, but it has a lead times which has to be compressed through various means, and government has to play ministry of our ministry of pharmaceutical and chemicals, and ministry has to play an important role to drive this at least in the initial stage with the industry association. That is my point of view.
Great.
Nitin, can I add to this what Mr. Parab and Mr. Majekar has mentioned?
Sure, you can. Just wanted to highlight that.
Just a sentence. Just a sentence. Yeah, being with the CII, I personally, and I've also worked with PwC on preparing the white paper on API, and we have submitted it 2 years back to the government. Last year also, we have also interacted with the government, and Pharmaceuticals is also joined hands with CII, and jointly it is being approached to the government of India, and an interministerial approach where today it is you have to go to 12 windows to get a permission for set up a manufacturing unit, but our proposals have been that it has to be a single window approach. The first reaction has been that the government has already set up the Mumbai-Delhi corridor, giving these facilities of a single window manufacturing license for setting up of the API facilities. That's all I wanted to address, Nitin, being a part of the CII Executive Committee.
Great. I think you in a way hit the nail, Mr. Bhattacharya, to kind of bring out the role government can obviously have been doing a great job, but enabling that single window on the approval and regulatory interaction perspective would be very helpful. Just I think I'm cognizant of time. We have about 10 more minutes. So I wanted to come to you, Vijay, really talking about improving this last mile delivery. There are a lot of challenges. So how we can address them and how we can continue working with the government to kind of drive some of these infrastructural improvements. Vijay?
Yeah, I think the first and foremost thing which I think we need to look at is how can we collaborate with the government machineries and encourage some of the migrant laborers who have actually moved back. Okay, how can they come? Because I think the most of the today we have trucks, but majorly I would say the cleaners and drivers are also missing on the route. So I think that's very much important in this. Second is the safety aspect. Okay, of course, one is that okay, you would go and deliver, but like at pharma companies or the warehouses or the depots or the C&Fs, we would practice safety, infrared scanning, everything of drivers and everything. But once it is actually handed over to the transporter, okay, how does this actually get ensured that okay, till it reaches the distributor or the stockist or the retailer, actually this process is actually carried forward. Okay. The other part is the reliability. Okay. Today, when we look at the reliability aspect, the lead times for deliveries where it was 24 to 48 hours are now even taking 24 to even 72 or sometimes more than that. Okay, that is one thing. With again India being split into zones, what about red zones and containment zones where most of the where we still have in cities and urban areas, how are you going to actually make that? So these challenges definitely will control. And over and above, of course, one of the most important thing is how do you actually bring down your cost? Okay, because this all will come down to cost aspect.
Right.
I just try to keep it small because I know we are running out of time.
Yeah, thank you, Vijay, for the understanding. Very quickly, I will come to you, Arjun. Really, I think logistics and connectivity, intermodal connectivity or general connectivity has been an issue in India. While there is some progress in the recent times, a lot more needs to be done. So, basically, your experience, how do you think with this? I think infrastructure will take its own time, but how do you think the companies can really plan the kind of better response and better servicing to the market, and what role can really companies play along with the government, Arjun?
Sure. I think I'll take a step back before people talked about government licensing as well. I think from that angle, GST and EVA bill were pretty much the building blocks of that interdigital mode between government and companies. I think what you see today is the actual, what we really need to go forward, as in fact, Ashok sir also said that this could be just one pandemic, trade war, and the wars which are coming up are the next set of pandemic which is going to affect different countries, right? So I think what will be very, very critical is that should be a very tight collaboration between government portals and private company portals, so that there is a easy way of routing those approvals and getting those approvals state-wise. What we observed in FMCG and other organizations, they faced a major problem in taking local approvals to open warehouses. And that could have been done much more seamlessly if there was a better tie-up between government or digital tie-up between government and private firms. Today, that is only limited to GST and EVA bills, and that's because that's in government's favor probably. But that's something which I think can be enlarged as a scope. I think when you talk about AI and machine learning, I think they're dependent on what data you feed in. So historical trends do not really reflect what pandemic has brought to the company or any country. Right? So I think historical AI and ML probably would be a so-called short-term or a mid-term kind of a goal rather than a short-term goal. An immediate goal should be, as in fact Ravi sir talked about, constraint and scenario planning. I think constraint management will take its own role today. Today, constraints are changing at every day level, dynamically, every 10 days, every 15 days. I think technology has to incorporate those kinds of ability to change and manage the optimization of deliveries with constraint management at a daily level is something which is required today. Because what you've been doing is an historical constraint based on states which probably stagnates every year or has to be just reviewed 1 or 2%. But technology should be able to help you manage that. And last and foremost is track and trace. I mean, track and trace today is something which, as some gentleman actually pointed out, that it's a matter of installing GPS machines, as rightly said. But I think ability to create a control tower to have actionable insights using that track and trace will be very critical. Because today, driver's performance, and especially in pharma, temperature control and driver's ability to be there, tracking his behavior, tracking speeds of the truck, their entrance into different states, where is it stuck, will be very, very critical. So I think technology has an underlying and overarching over both kind of play to play. And I think that's pretty much it. Digitization and optimization is the theme going forward for supply chain for sure.
Great. Thanks a lot. I think great insight and great input with respect to really on the back of GST and EU bill, how the digital can bring the government and companies together to kind of make this much more efficient. Great insight, Arjun. Thanks a lot for that. So we have another 2-3 minutes. Wanted to kind of question to, and any of you can chime in. I think we talked about technology a lot, the government interventions and everything. I think the people is central to all of this, as we say, as Dr. Mathu highlighted in the beginning. So just wanted to see your thoughts with respect to the capabilities and supply chain skills, as one of the speakers talked about earlier, is an issue. We are not up to the mark with respect to really enabling a very efficient supply chain operations of the future across the country as of now. So how do we enable that? Any thoughts from, I mean, just open to the floor. Anyone with any thoughts?
Okay, I'll try to, I'll attempt to answer,
Sure.
where we experience it. So, skilling is, of course, very important. And I'll also like to link it to, to the question that you had earlier on digitization. Of course, the technology across the function is changing, and it is evolving, right? So as a result of which, you really have to keep on upskilling your people. So the reason I brought in again that digital angle was because no digital every digital intervention is not the same. You have to first understand that it has to be bucketed into a couple of categories. At the very basic level, you are dealing with digitization that deals with fixing the processes. It deals with automation. It deals with removing the non-value adding processes. Basically, it deals with transactions. Okay. Then, of course, you have other levels of digital interventions which are transformational. So where we talked about planning engines and so on and so forth. And then there are something higher levels, people talking about AI, ML, and other disruptive technologies. But before we even go to that level, let's look at about the skill set that exists in managing the very basics. Okay. So not only at operating machines, let us also talk it down to much further level about how are your drivers trained? Are your drivers trained in dealing with safety? Are your drivers trained in how they handle their assets? Especially now, you have processes that takes care of sanitization, avoid contamination, so on and so forth. So there has to be a very focused program on skill development, for within organizations and across organizations. And as you move up the value chain in your learning, so then there is an element of unlearning what you already know. So you unlearn what you have, and then you relearn as per the new processes. So I'll just set the stage for somebody else to take it further.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a continuous process, as you rightly say, unlearn, learn, and again unlearn and learn. And especially I think some companies when we interact with, we are seeing adoption of the technology sometimes becomes a challenge because sometimes or many times people do not understand. Any other thoughts from the other speakers?
Yeah, it is also, to be mentioned that unlike, some of the FMCG organization, pharma's adoption is definitely lesser. And it's not only because of, knowledge per se, but it's also because of complex distribution network that we have. Okay. So typically large number of distributors, even today the distributors are, not getting aligned to RTGS payment, which is a simple, digitalization, which is a need of the hour, because they feel that traditional models are better. There is a, one of the challenge today we have is a trace and tracks. It's very difficult to even, get into batch-wise details that is lying in the trade, etc., which is a regulatory requirement, largely because of the, complex and fragmented distribution network. Now, this perhaps need to be changed, and there are indications that with the revamping of network, starting with CNFH and large players that are coming in as a consolidator, maybe two or 3 years from hence, things may look different, and that is one area which will help to bring in more avenues for distribution digitalization. Is my point of view on this on this point.
Great. Thanks a lot, Mr. Parab, for that. Any other speaker? One last set of inputs.
Vijay. Yeah. So from my perspective, I would say there has to be people capability. I think has to be looked into. I think every organization needs to look at it. What I always believe earlier, of course, making a shipment documents, making deliveries, making coordinating with the customers and other things. This is one way of looking at it. But how do we add value? Okay, I think earlier when GST came in, there was a network restructuring. Okay, but I think supply chain has actually has been changing constantly. Your demands have been changing constantly. Your areas of sales have been increasing. How are you actually constantly looking at the current paradigm? Same way with regards to your warehousing capabilities or your transportation. Okay, you are doing it with X vendor. Okay, that is one vendor. One way of it is negotiating, but the other way is like how do you actually try to look at milk runs, try to look at dedicated fleet management, try to take advantage of digitalization in terms of like the kind of communication which you are doing, because there are a lot of auto mails in track and trace which can automatically go to the customer and create that customer value. The customer today actually comes to know that okay, my material is actually has left Alchem premises and it is going to reach there in 4 days. And I don't have to, my team did not need not get into it. Automatically the track and trace happens, and he's also aware. EPODs, okay, is a simple kind of a thing, like investing in a little bit of digital technology where you need people with that kind of a mindset coming into and trying to see that okay, how you can actually make things happen, and trying to look at of course, there are a lot of tools available, but how do you actually derive value out of the tool? That is more important. Otherwise, what will happen? We will use the tool. The data is there. We would do good analysis, but out of that analysis, how are you actually going to make in small projects to actually improve your inventory, improve your visibility, improve your overall cost, improve your availability right from the manufacturing side till it reaches the patients. Okay. Today, I think that wow factors need to be created, and with this pandemic, I think we are not saying that another pandemic will not come. It might come, it might not come. But how are we prepared in terms of the entire supply chain? So the supply chain structure or the team structure also needs to be looked into in terms of how do we look at, is there a separate design team? Is there a separate consulting team? Is there a complete operations team, or is there something which is going to do in the field? So I think this needs to be divided into and planning definitely plays an important role.
Thanks a lot to Vijay for that. I think we are top of the hour.
Just to add, sorry Nitin, one point just to add.
Okay.
While we talked about organizations or supply chain agility and adaptability, it's also about the people's adaptability and agility towards new technology. So I think while we expect the organizations to adapt new technology, it's also about how to keep bringing or keep educating the people about the new technologies. Like a lot of organizations, if you would have seen, are moving from, say, a forecast driven MRP to a demand driven MRP. So it's about how quick and how agile are you to take that. Then but I think still we see fundamentals. I have personally seen like a lot of fundamentals or on ground knowledge is still I would say required. Like people are doing demand forecasting, demand planning, and they're directly using tools and the tools are so fantastic that you don't probably might need to know basics of the algorithm, like what volt winter does, what exponential smoothing will do for you, what causal will do for you. But I think fundamentals as well as agility of new learning, what's happening in the supply chain across industry, how is FMCG, which is, we all know, slightly adaptability or adoption of new technologies. So kind of learning and agility.
Yeah, great thoughts, Gaurav.
Just
thanks a lot. Sujit, we're at the top of the hour. We're actually over of the time by about 10 minutes. Okay,
yeah,
one last statement maybe.
Yeah, Ashok,
Okay, Nitin, what I think is that we have touched upon what are the domain expertise required by the supply chain people who are there. But what is more important is, because we have been talking, we can get people who are digital savvy, who have analytical skills and all those. But what we also need to look at is how do we develop and inculcate a culture of the softer skills like cross-functional working skills. We need to look at what is the conflict resolution skills. So these are some of the softer skills and interpersonal skills. So I think some of the softer skills also need to be looked and developed in order to ensure a sustainable, successful supply chain team within an organization.
Completely agree. And I think I was going to say more of how we approach, how we think, and you very well captured it as soft skills, Mr. Bhattacharya. Thanks for that. Thank you to all the speakers for a very engaged dialogue. Karan, Priyanka, any last thoughts from your side? I think we had a holistic dialogue around multiple facets of pharma supply chain. Any closing remarks from your side?
Nothing really. We've heard a whole lot from all of you on how to create success, how while COVID-19 might be a catalyst, but it's also going to accelerate the adoption of new models, new capabilities to be more agile, how we need to change our short-term actions to respond to this immediate challenge that we're facing. Of course, no industry has been spared from this entire black swan event, but we hope and believe that today's deliberations lays down a path for how pharma supply chains and perhaps even supply chains everywhere can come out stronger amidst this entire pandemic. Thank you everyone for your thoughts, hugely insightful, very, very rich takeaways from all of this. And thank you all for taking time out of your schedules to be here with us. Thank you to all of our delegates for tuning in. From the Economic Times and all of us here, it's us signing off.
Thank you.
Thank you.